The number one reason people stall out or even gain fat, particularly stomach fat, when they're trying to lose weight is not because of certain foods causing a problem. I mean, sure, that could play a part. There could be foods that you have issues with. And I'm not the kind of guy that looks at things super generically. Those that know me know that I acknowledge that calories are extremely important and probably the most important thing that we know about. But I also know that there's probably other things going on too that we haven't looked at entirely. I look at the whole equation, but I don't think that some individual foods or anything like that are causing the problem. In fact, there's a very concrete answer as to what's happening, why people gain weight while they're trying to lose fat. It's a serious thing and it makes a lot of sense. After today's video, I put a link down below for 15% off Fatty 15. Now, Fatty 15 is a unique C15, 15 carbon chain fat that is now being heavily researched and might be even more important than omega-3s, especially when it comes down to cellular health and it comes down to mitochondrial function. This was originally discovered with the US Navy when they were looking at dolphins, and they found that dolphins in the Navy, like ordnance, or all kinds of different dolphins they use them for, they found that they were developing metabolic issues, insulin resistance, et cetera, et cetera. They found they were deficient in a particular fat called C15. Turns out humans are pretty deficient in it too because it's hard to get from the diet because it usually comes with copious amounts of dairy fat. So it's a unique type of fat that protects the cell, can actually strengthen the cellular membrane. Hugely important with tremendous benefits. And I put a link down below so you can read more about it, but also check it out. That is a 15% off discount link. Again, using the code Thomas15 for Fatty 15 C15 fat. You have to check it out. I'm gonna make this really simple. When you reduce calories, it's pretty obvious that your metabolic rate will decrease. That's like sophomore high school. We learned that, right? Like basically adaptive thermogenesis. You restrict calories, you're going to be in a spot where your body starts to burn less. It's one of the problems with dieting, right? It's like why when you look at contestants of The Biggest Loser, that old TV show with Jillian Michaels, 80% of them gain the weight back. Like their metabolisms slowed down, so they gain the weight back. But what about when you're dieting? Well, what people don't realize, and there is a study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that took a look at this. As you reduce your caloric intake, your basal metabolic rate slows down, which means the cheat meals or the accidental overeating that you do has a bigger impact each and every time. So this study that was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that when people were in a deficit and then would refeed, they would end up decreasing their metabolic rate by about 108 calories per day. There's another study published in Nutrición Hospitalaria that found that it was about 164 calories per day if subjects were a little more overweight. Bottom line is between 100 and 200 calorie decrease per day in a typical diet. Okay, now I'm not saying it decreases that much every day, but you're burning 150 less calories every day. So think about it. The more you put yourself in a deficit and restrict calories, the less calories you burn. So that same 2,000 calorie cheat meal that you had a month ago, if you had that same 2,000 calorie cheat meal now, your metabolic rate is slower, which means that 2,000 calorie cheat meal today has a bigger negative impact than it did on you a month ago. And then as you restrict calories more, whether or not you lost weight, you do that 2,000 calorie cheat meal again in another month, and it's gonna have an even bigger negative impact. You need to, if you're going to have cheat meals, you need to shrink them. Otherwise, you're defeating the purpose. If you don't shrink your cheat meals, then each time you have a cheat meal, it's going to have a bigger negative effect. So let's say you put yourself into a 1,500 calorie deficit for the week, and then you had a 2,000 calorie cheat meal. You're gonna end up in a positive surplus. You're gonna end up at a surplus for the end of the week and you're gonna gain weight. Okay, but let's say you had 1,500 calories in a cheat meal and you had a 1,500 calorie weekly deficit over the course of a week. You'd break even, right? You would for that first week, but then as your metabolism slows down, that same 1,500 calories is gonna make you start gaining weight. This is bottom line. It is bottom line. The easiest way that people screw up. And it happens constantly because people do not realize metabolically when you are sensitive and you are in this sort of deficit mode, the body wants to do whatever it can to grab stuff from a surplus. It can grab that fuel and it wants to store it because your body is trying to survive. Think about it from an ancestral standpoint. You just went a long period of time without food or minimal food, and then now you're eating a lot. Your body just adapted. Okay? Now this is not earth-shattering rocket science, but what people don't realize is just the incremental effect of cheat meal after cheat meal after cheat meal. What I highly suggest you do, if you have amounts of fat that you are trying to lose, is rather than doing this aggressive restriction and then a cheat meal, you are much better off to have little bits of treats every day. Even if your weight loss is a little slower, and it probably won't be, it'll probably be faster. You are much better off to have a little bit of chocolate or a little bit of this. People say, oh, I don't want to give my brain the satisfaction of that. Okay, well, you're going to give your brain the satisfaction of that in 2 weeks when you sit down and you go out to eat and you blow it. And unfortunately, the easiest way to blow it, this is going to be the unpopular opinion, especially on this channel, the easiest way to blow it is with high-fat foods. High carbohydrate foods actually do stimulate some leptin, which might be decent at increasing the metabolic rate, at least in lean people, not in overweight people. So if you're already lean and you're trying to maintain, a high carbohydrate meal might stimulate leptin and might actually increase your metabolic rate. But high fat doesn't do much for your metabolism at all as a cheat meal. So if you go and you say, I'm going to have my cheat meal and I'm going to have a big burger and fries, what that's going to do is that's going to be a high fat meal and that's going to probably cause more storage than if it was just a high carb and lower fat meal. So what my rules for you are, if you must have a high calorie cheat meal, at least keep the fat intake a little lower, keep it more of a carbohydrate focused cheat meal, even though that's not going to be good. It's going to be problematic and I don't recommend it. Okay, it's going to be better than doing high carb and high fat together because you do have this thing called metabolic gridlock. We do have a thing called the Randall cycle, where especially when we're in a deficit and then you go high fat and high carb together, that is metabolically very difficult for your body to deal with, all that fuel coming in a surplus at once. Not to mention, your basal metabolic rate is lower. So what I would recommend is that you add fuel in here and there, be a little more relaxed with how you structure it, and it's going to be a better long-term effect. I'll see you tomorrow.